my 99-inch workbench, complete by the framing portion until, decide to stain it or whatever I want to do to it extra to make it look a little bit better. We have enough room on the bottom shelving here for basically all your large tools. We have power running on the side, right on the bottom portion locked in. We have a long 36-inch ruler here just to help, when you're measuring things, you don't have to bring out the tape measure all the time for small projects. Cup holder here specifically for pencils, pens, markers, those kind of things, or obviously the square right there. On this side we have another little shelf holder for the tape measures or black tape or electrical tape, whatever you decide to put in there. And on top of it over here we have our vise. So this was made out of some plywood, some 2x4s, some 2x6s, and some 1x4s out here. 4x4 for the legs, and basically we're going to show you how to do this, and let's get started.
Okay, so the first day. So this took me 3 days to do. Basically this project was about 2 hours per day, just based on everything I had to do between working on this project. So first step we're doing is putting our piece of plywood down. Now this piece of plywood that I purchased was 4x8, basically 4 feet by 8 feet. So what I want to do is I want to use as much of this plywood as I can, so my shelf and tabletop are both going to be 2 feet. So I'm marking 2 feet from one side to the other on both sides of this plywood. Once you have that, you're going to get your chalk line and basically just snap a line from the markings that you made. And that way you have the ability to have an even cut when you're using your circular saw. So what I got here is a Kreg rip cut. Basically, it's going to be almost like using a table saw with a guide. You place your circular saw on your mark where your chalk line's at, and you're going to use the left side against the plywood, and all you're doing is holding that left side flushed with the plywood and making your cut. I love this tool. It cost me about maybe $30 some dollars. At Lowe's, it works wonderful. You don't have to worry about going offline. As you can see, it's a very easy tool to use. It just hooks right onto your circular saw and it makes your cut perfectly straight. The second portion of this is removing the piece of plywood that we're going to use later as the shelf. So those two should be somewhat similar to size. Because of the cut, it may not exactly be the exact same size, but we're going to make it work anyways. So this next step that we're doing is we're putting up our 2x4s on the bottom side of this tabletop. So basically, if you're looking at this, the portion that's laying against the concrete is actually the top portion of your table. So we're working from the we're working underneath that. So once you make your markings to where you want your 2x4s to be cut, very simple. Make your cuts. Use your squares as much as possible in order to make sure that you're going to have an even cut on the miter saw. You're going to get your miter saw, line it up to where the cut's at. This one has a laser guide, but I never trust laser guides. They're not always on, so I always just do it like this. I adjust it from the blade to the actual marking I made on the 2x4, and once you have that marking on, you can hold it with your hand. You can use this type of clamp that there is on this miter saw. So you're going to make your cut. Once you make that cut, you're going to bring that piece of 2x4 back to your frame, and you're going to level this part off, make sure everything's straight. Once you have that straight, you're going to use some wood glue. Wood glue acts as an awesome adhesive in order to hold pieces of wood together. Not only does the screws hold it in, but the wood glue also helps tremendously. So all I did was put a clamp here, hold it in. It's not going to hold it tight, but enough for me to have an extra hand. What I did here was make some pilot holes into the 2x4, and then from there, I drilled the screws in. The reason for the pilot holes is so that you don't split the wood when you're putting the screw in. And it makes it a lot easier too. Again, you're going to do this for that side and put your wood glue on the other side and do the exact same. Once you're done with this portion, we're going to move on to the opposite side. Once you're on the opposite side, you're going to do the exact same thing as you did initially with the other side, the first side. So I'm making my markings here. I know where I want to cut. If you decide to cut on the inside or the outside, it all depends on your preference. So just make sure that it's all matched up with the plywood. So we're going to do the same exact process again here. We have our marking on our 2x4, marking up the blade, leveling it off, and making our cut. Go ahead and put your 2x4 back on the spot where you initially made your markings. Make sure that everything's flushed. If it does look flush to you, then you can make your cuts. If it doesn't, make your adjustments. Again, pilot holes into the 2x4, and don't forget to put your wood glue on. Once you have all that set in place, you have your frame for your the top plate of your table, the top tabletop. Okay, all I'm doing here is making a measurement to where how high I want my table. Everybody's different, all different sizes, it's just your preference. Once you know your measurement on how high you want your table, you're going to get your 4x4s and you're going to make your measurement on those. So let's say I wanted a 3-foot high table. Well, my 4x4s are going to be marked at 3 feet high. Once you have that marking down, you're going to take that to your miter saw. Again, this clamp right here was too small for my 4x4. So I had to take it off, but there's enough weight to hold it on level. So once you do that, make your marking, put your miter saw up to that marking, and make your cut. After you have these all cut out right here for you, you're going to make the same exact measurements. Doesn't matter if you were an inch shorter than what you thought you were going to put it on. Doesn't matter, you don't want to be a foot shorter obviously, but doesn't matter if you were a little bit smaller on the cut than what you originally made. I'm not even using my tape measure anymore on these additional cuts. All I'm doing is lining them up and making the same exact cut as I did with the first piece. As you can see here, again, just making your cut exactly, making your mark where your the first leg was, and that way they're all the exact same. I might be an inch off, I might be a couple inches off, I may be a couple centimeters off, I don't know. But regardless, they're all the same. And in the end result, it should look like this, completely flushed with each other. Day 2 of this project for me was the leg portion, starting off with the leg portion. So as you can see, this is where the legs are going to go. They're going to fit in the corners of the 2x4s, the frame that you initially made. Once you have those legs up, I want to make sure that everything is leveled off. So I have my 4-foot level here, and if they're leveled that way, I'm all right. If they're leveled the long way with my 8-foot level, I know that I measured everything right and I made all my cuts right. So all I'm using here are the 10x3 inch wood screws. Exterior wood screws, make sure they're exterior if you're going to be using this outside. That way they don't corrode on you. And what I'm doing here is making some pilot holes into the frame. So the pilot holes, again, like how we did initially with the bottom frame, you want to make sure you do that. That way your wood does not split. I have a post level. A lot of people use regular levels for this, a 2-foot level. But post levels are great tools to have, and it's just basically so you don't have to keep putting a level on each side, and it's going to show you exactly if you're leveled by just having that on one side of the post. Make sure you're putting some wood glue on. The wood glue is going to act as the extra adhesive. Remember that when you're putting your screws in. Just remember, because it was leveled at one time does not mean it's going to stay leveled when you're putting these screws in. So I used a clamp to help myself out with this project. Instead of just using your hand, if you use your hand, you're going to see that the wood's going to get pushed back. So that clamp helps tremendously. So once you have all that leveled off on the first one, Make sure you're putting all your screws in all your pilot holes, but once you have that one all leveled off, you're going to move on to the next one. Now, I was planning on speeding through the next 3 legs. However, I came across an obstacle that I wanted you guys to see in case you guys came across it as well. So, this leg was leveled when I first put it on. However, you're going to see when I put the screws in that it sucks the leg inwards towards me, and it doesn't stay leveled. So I'm going to show you how to fix that. So all I'm doing right here is grabbing my clamps just like I did before. We're going to clamp on one side, and I should have clamped on both sides, but at this time you can see how much the leg is moving already on me. It's already pulling towards me, so I'm checking my level marks and noticing that it's not leveled right now. One side is, but the other side is not. So I figured, well, let's see if I put a screw in, what's going to happen. So I put the screw into the pilot hole, and you can see how much it pulls towards me. Doesn't look right, and I don't want it to be this way. So what I did was put another clamp on the other side to hold it in. Now I know one side is leveled, so I'm going to go ahead and screw in that side that is already leveled off. So put your screws into your pilot holes and place them into the legs of the table. Now the second portion, I'm going to use this piece of wood strip here in order to make this leveled. If you look at it closely, you can see it moving outwards. I hit that in until it's leveled off. Once I have it leveled off, then I can put my screws in. All you got to do is snap that piece of wedge out in order for that to be leveled now. Again, the same process goes for all of these. Put your wood glue on, make sure you're using the wood screws in order for this to go in, and all you're doing is making sure that these stay leveled. So I'm going to have an issue with this one again, and all I'm doing is using that piece of wood in order to act as a wedge. Don't want to completely smack this wedge into it completely hard so that it won't come out. You want to tightly put it in there, but you're not over hitting it. Just keep checking the level after a couple hits. Once it's in and leveled in, again, put your clamp on, put your screw in, and it should stay exactly leveled. Then snap that piece of wedge off. So again, the same exact process with all of this. You're just putting your screws into the pilot holes. Everything. Make sure that you're checking your level after every single screw that you're putting in, because any side could be off. So make sure you're checking that, and if needed to, make your adjustments. As you can see here, the clamps come in very handy with this job. If I tried holding it with my hand and it just did not want to work. So again, snap off that piece of wood, move on to your last leg, and don't forget your post level. Put your post level on, and go ahead and finish this portion of the table off. Make sure you're using your wood glue. This wood glue is gonna attach to basically all your 2x4s, and it's gonna get rock hard in the end. So this portion of the project is probably the most important portion of the project, just because if you don't make this leveled, your whole table is going to be off. You can always make adjustments on the top side in the end, but why make more work on yourself when you can just do it all here? Again, that post level, make sure you guys get one if you're going to decide on doing this. It helps a lot. Better than putting a 2-foot level on each side and just keep measuring, making sure it's leveled on side by side. So once you have all your legs in, you're going to again check to make sure that everything's leveled off. Once you have that all leveled off, you're going to make your marking to where you want your shelf to go. Again, this is your preference. Doesn't matter how high you go, how low you go. My recommendation is going about maybe halfway down. That way you know that additional tools can fit in there without having to struggle to get them in or out. So again, the clamp on one side, once I make my mark with my speed square, putting it on one side, I'm just nailing it in. You could screw this in, you can nail it in by hand, or you can use a nail gun. I'm using a nail gun on this side. Just make sure that when you put on the other side, you make sure that everything's leveled off with that level. You don't even need to make a marking on that other side. All you have to do is put your level up, Once it's leveled, you know exactly the same exact distance from the bottom to the top as you are on the other side where you first made your mark. Okay, once you have that first portion down, all you're going to do is grab your level, make sure that's leveled off, and then make your markings on the other side. It's very simple. You don't need to do an additional measurement. All you got to do is make sure that you're leveled off. Use your speed square to make your marks, match up with the marking you made with the level, and do the same exact process again. We're bringing up the 2x4 up to one side, using the clamp to hold it. Again, this is not going to hold it tight, but enough for you to be able to get to the other side and level it off. These clamps are awesome, again, if you're doing this project by yourself. Once you have those, you're just going to get your hammer. Make sure that you're flushed up with all your edges. That's what I'm doing here, making small adjustments. Once I know that everything's leveled off and flushed off, I'm going to go ahead and nail this side in. Again, you can use nails, screws, doesn't matter what you use on this side. I just decided to use a nail gun. Making sure that everything's leveled off from 2x4 to 2x4. Once that is, I know that this is going to be perfectly leveled. So this is the portion right here where I'm nailing them in. Once you have them nailed in, you can see how sturdy this thing is. I'm going to stand on it right now, and it's not going anywhere. Okay, after that portion, all I'm doing is making my measurement for this outside bracket. So I'm putting the 2x4 on the edge, and I'm making my marking. I want to make sure that I'm making the markings on the outside so that it flushes up with the other 2x4s. Get my speed square, make my mark, get your miter saw, make your cut, and go ahead and put this on. Once you know that it's on, go ahead and nail it in or screw it in. Again, depending on what you want to do. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that everything's leveled off and flushed. Once you have that side down, you're going to move to the opposite side. You're going to do the exact same process as the first side. Once you have that 2x4 on, move your plywood out of the way, flip your table right side up, and we're going to start making some additional top plates for the top of this table. Basically what I'm using here is a 1x, and we're going to make some additional plates in order for this tabletop to be perfectly leveled and something to screw into. All I'm using right here is my table saw. I'm stripping the pieces of wood to the size I want it to be cut at, basically just the top side of the 2x4. So I'm going to make multiple cuts here. All I'm doing is making sure that everything is straight and leveled with these cuts, because that's what's going to be your final finish to the top plate, basically, when you're looking at it. Huge safety tip. Make sure when you're using this tool or any other tools that cut wood to keep your hands away from the blade. You would like another hand to use during the remainder of this project. You can see what I'm doing here is just placing the 1x's on the top plate that we're going to be making, and we're going to be setting these in. Make your marks, make your cuts. I'm extending this out a little bit further than the 2x4, just so that I have that extra look in the end as a runoff almost. That's basically all I'm doing here. Once you make your measurements, you're going to be using the miter saw to make your cuts. Once you have all your cuts in place, you're going to have something that looks like this in the end. Nothing is actually placed in yet, so that's why you can see that some are actually off. But what we're going to do now is we're going to get our screwdriver, and we're going to make some pilot holes into the 1x, so that the screws fit in and don't split the wood when we're drilling the screws in. Most important part of this is make sure that you start off with one side and then drill the opposite side. Don't go down the line. You want to make sure that everything's leveled and everything's straight. So we're moving all the way down to the other side, and we're going to screw this side in. After you're done screwing this side in, then you can go ahead and make your put your screws into the pilot holes that are within the inside of the wood. And all I'm doing here is basically what I did was I made about I don't know, 4 to 5 pilot holes per strip of wood that I made. It really doesn't matter too much. You don't want to put too many in, because when you put your plywood in and you tack it in, you don't want it to hit too many screws. Obviously, you don't want it to hit any screws at all. But if you put too many screws on the top plate of this, you're bound to hit more screws than if you were to put less on. Okay, after you have all those drilled in, what you're going to do is, well, what I prefer to do is put in my vise on this side. So I'm putting some 2x4s to act as a reinforcement for when I put my vise in. It will be connected into these 2x4s, and you're going to see what I mean when we get down to the vise. I'm putting 2x4s in this spot right here because that's the width of my vise. If your vise is wider than 2x4s, you're going to want to put 3 in there. It all just depends on how big the vise is that you're doing. Again, here I'm putting my second 2x4 in. We made our cuts, and we're going to go ahead and just put this one right in. It's a tight squeeze, but again, it's preferred to be this way. That way you have everything just kind of flushed with the remainder of the frame. So all I'm doing here is lightly tapping this. If I hit it too hard, it's obviously going to fall out of place because there's no nails or screws or anything in this thing right now. It's just getting this into place, making sure that it's all leveled and flush with the wood. It's going to take some fine adjustments just to make sure that you're in that spot. Okay, once you have those 2x4s in, you're going to go ahead and place your top piece, your plywood on. This is going to be your tabletop. You can see it coming together now, and everything should be even and leveled off to this point. Just because of all the markings you made already, all the work you did to level this off, there's no reason why this top plate should be uneven, the tabletop. After I have that piece on, all we're going to do is screw in the 4 corners for right now. We're not screwing all of them in because what we're going to do is later on we're going to use a finish nail gun, and we're going to go ahead and finish off the tabletop so that the nails that are inside of there are hardly seen. You're going to get your shelf now, and we're going to be placing it on top, and we're going to be making our markings to cut out the 5x5s here. The reason being is you want to make sure you're cutting around the 4x4s and onto the 2x4s, but yet enough room to maneuver it around and basically so it fits right. All I'm doing is using my circular saw, and it's going to make the cuts very nice in order for this to fit in. Once we have that cut, what we're going to do is we're going to go a full cut all the way across in order for this piece of plywood to fit onto the 2x4s. I probably could use some clamps on this one, but I just held it down with my hand. I knew the cut wasn't going to be too big. I highly recommend using clamps in this situation. It's going to hold your board down and help you out with these cuts. Now we're on the part that I talked about just a little while ago, that we're going to make our cuts straight across. All I'm getting is a level, and we're going to make our lines right across from one corner of the inside to the other corner of the inside. And we're going to use our circular saw again, and we're going to make our cut straight across on both sides. Okay, once you have those cuts and you place your shelf in, it should look something like this. Now you can see we still have some gaps on the end. We're going to put those original pieces that we cut out, and we're going to place them into that spot. And we're going to use that. We're going to use a 1x, and we're going to hold these together. Your 1x is going to either go on the bottom or on the top. I chose to go on the top. I figured that if I decide to put anything in that area, it's going to be another portion of a shelving that's going to be able to bracket in anything from rolling off the end. So all I'm doing here is putting some pilot holes into the 1xs, and we're going to be screwing this in onto the plywood, the little shelf piece that we cut out originally, and we're going to be placing that back on. And then the other pilot holes that I made for this 1x is going to get connected to the 2x4 that we placed on for the bottom shelf. Just make sure that you have enough room on both sides for that 1x piece to sit down flush on both sides, the 2x4 as well as the plywood. Once you have all that in place, again, we're going to place that piece onto the plywood, and it should be a perfectly flushed piece of wood because we already had cut it from the original piece of plywood after making our measurements. And it should look something like this. Once you have that on there, go ahead and screw in the other into the other pilot holes that we made, and it's going to be latched on once we screw in this side. All I'm doing here now is we're going to make almost L-shaped cuts in order to fit where the 2x4 is meeting with the plywood on the outer sides, the corners now. Again, we already have our pieces cut that we're using here. The length should be perfectly right, and all we're making now are the cuts. I use my table saw here. Just be very careful when using this. You're making a very close cut, and your hands are very close to this blade. So if you decide to do this, I highly recommend using some sort of push rod, a push stick, something to assist you. I've been using this table saw for a while now, so I'm familiar with it. But still, it's a very dangerous tool to use if you're not doing it right. So all I'm doing here again is just making my L-shaped cuts, and we're going to be placing this back onto the corners right where the 4x4s are at and where it meets with the 2x4s. And you'll see what I mean by the time I get to that spot. Okay, so once you get all your corners cut, all you're going to do is go to your area where these are going to fit. You can see the L-shaped brackets going on there. All I did was use some wood glue, put it on there to hold for now. Now it's time to make the trim for the outside. So I want to make 45-degree cuts on these outsides. So I'm using 1x's here, and we're going to use the miter saw to make these 45-degree angles. All you're going to do is make your marking to where you want it to meet the corners. Put your pencil mark on the wood and turn your miter saw to 45 degrees to whichever side it's going to be cutting to. Once you make your 45-degree cut, we're going to place it back onto the frame of the table. As you can see right here, this is the 45-degree cut. We're going to be placing it back onto the table, and you can see the 45-degree cut from right there. All I'm using right here is a finish nail gun, and we're going to tack this in with the finish nails so that we have our very first piece of strip for the frame, for the trim on the outside of the frame. I'm using a clamp here. It's going to help me level this off. Once you have it met with the corner, just go ahead and start nailing it in. Once you get down to your second piece of wood, you're going to line it up flushed with the first piece that you put in. As you can see, the gap on the left side is very minimal. All you're going to do is make your cut. You're going to make your mark right here to where you want your next 45-degree cut. You're going to move the miter saw over to the other side, to your other 45-degree angle, and we're going to make our cut on this side in order for the 45-degree to be hanging off the opposite side of the frame. You're going to see exactly what I mean when I put this on. Okay, there's our 45-degree cut. You can see what it looks like up close. And we're going to go ahead and place this onto the frame and clamp it in again and go ahead and start tacking it in with the finish nail gun. You're just going to resume the same exact process for all the sides. Make your 45-degree cuts. Once you have it on there, like this one right here, we're going to go ahead and make our marking to where the next 45-degree angle cut's going to be. We already have one 45-degree on the left side. Once you make your cut, place it on and use the nail gun again and go ahead and nail it in. So I'm going to somewhat speed through this area since we have an understanding now of how to make your 45-degree cuts. Once you nail this in, all you have to do is finish the trim for the remainder of the sides. Just make your cuts, make sure that everything's flush, make sure that everything's even. Use your clamp. It helps you out with this process. Make sure everything's tight when you're putting it on so you don't have any gaps between your 45-degree cuts or even the seams of the 1-bys that are going between, or I'm sorry, on the side of the frame and are flushed with each other. Make sure everything's just tight when you're putting this on. It looks so much better. Okay, once you come up to the last part of this, you're going to see it's going to be a small cut left. All you're going to do is flush it up with the last piece and make a small little mark right here. And your piece of wood that you're going to be cutting is going to be that small. So take it to the miter saw, make your 45-degree cut on that, and go ahead and use the finish nail to place that in. This last piece right here, again, we have a 45-degree cut. We're going to go ahead and make sure it's flushed against the other 45-degree cut. Make your mark. The other last 45-degree cut you have to make on this side. And use the miter saw. Make your 45-degree cut. Bring it back and nail it in. You're going to see here what I like to do on this last part is, unless you're exactly precise with your cuts, you're going to have to make some sort of adjustments. You can see that my piece of wood that I just put on is a little longer than what it should be. So I'm going to make a marking again, and we're going to make another cut in order for this to be a perfect fit. It's almost like putting a puzzle together. Sometimes pieces are just too big, they don't work. You can't cut those, but we can cut these ones for sure and make this fit. Once you're done tacking that in, you're going to tack on the top plate of your, the top table portion of your table. And we're going to go ahead and tack in the bottom portion. We're using a finish nail. That way all the nails that are being put in there are very, very minimal in visibility. Make sure that you're tacking in all the pieces, even the ones that you cut and you had to replace onto there. Make sure you're tacking all that in so everything's nice and tight. Once you're done with this portion, we're going to move on to getting a piece of plywood, and we're going to make an additional border around the bottom shelf. So all you're doing right here is making a mark for the thickness from the legs out to the outside, or where the plywood meets. Get your table saw, make your cuts, and we're going to use this as the border portion of the bottom shelf. And again, you can see here what I'm using. It's just so you keep your hands out of the way of the blade. You can see here, these are this is the piece of plywood I'm using as a border. Now what I'm doing on this portion is putting some 2x6s on the bottom. What this is going to do is going to make the table very heavy on the bottom side. Bottom heavy basically. And this is not necessary. However, this is what I had lying around. So I decided to make the table look a little thicker with these 2x6s. This should be your final product up to this point. Everything seems to be looking okay at this point. Now it's time to put the accessories on. You could do a lot more at this point if you wanted to. You could sand it down, you could stain it, you could paint it, you could do whatever you want to this table. Right now I'm going to leave it raw so that if I decide to do that later, I can. Okay, so day 3 here is we're putting our vise on. Now remember we put the 2x4s underneath this tabletop. What I'm doing here is, this is an old vise I got from my dad a long time ago, and it works perfectly fine. You could put whatever vise you want on here, but this is the one I had already in my house. So you just want to make sure that when you're putting this on, the lever you have on there is going to not collide with your frame. Once you put your vise in this position that meets with the 2x4s on the bottom, you're going to get your square here, and you're going to make sure that it's at 90 degrees. And we're going to go ahead and make your markings in the holes in order onto the tabletop for our bolts to go in. All I'm using here are some carriage bolts. We have some washers here that fit over the holes. The carriage bolt's going to go into that washer, into the hole, and on the bottom side of the 2x4 is going to be the other washer and the nut. So all I'm doing here is making some holes with the drill, and big enough for those carriage bolts to fit into the vise and the plywood. Once you have all those holes drilled out, we're going to go ahead and place your vise back over those holes, and go ahead and put your washer into your carriage bolt, put the carriage bolt into the hole of the vise, and we're going to be moving down to the bottom portion in order to meet with the 2x4s, and we're going to go ahead and use some sort of wrench or a ratchet of some sort in order for this to tighten up. Okay, all we're doing now is we're on the bottom side of the 2x4. We're putting the washer on as well as a nut. I noticed that my socket for this portion of the project was too small of depth for the carriage bolt base to go into, so I just had to grab another wrench real fast and go ahead and tighten those up by hand. Doesn't make a difference to what you use. Obviously the socket would be a lot easier, but unfortunately the size I had would not work for this project. You just want to make sure that everything is completely tight, because when you use that vise you want to make sure that there's no give. This acts like a major tension with the washer against that 2x4. As you can see, everything opens up nice and smooth, and it's going to be closed. Once it closes in, you should have your handle nowhere near touching that frame of your table. A vise is used for many things. It's a very good tool to have. In case you're not sure what a vise does, here's an example of it. Holds a piece of wood very tight for you. Can make some markings, can make some pilot holes. There's a lot of things you can do with a vise. Again, these are all accessories I'm putting on. You don't necessarily have to put these on yours. I'm going to use a cup here that I have. It has some levers on the back side, some brackets in order to be able to put in. All I did was grab some conduit straps, and I figured that this is going to work the best for this. That way you could take that cup in and out if needed, and yet it still holds just fine. So all I'm doing is leveling this off, putting the conduit straps on, and drilling them in with regular wood screws. And once you have your second one on, the cup holder should be fit perfectly fine, just like that. Could be used for pencils, pens, markers, whatever you decide to use it for. The next portion I'm putting on here is going to be another shelf type of bracket that we're putting in. Again, fits perfect with the straps I'm going to be using. Just make your marking to wherever you want it to go. It doesn't matter how low or high it goes. It's all up to you to how you want to put this on. So this is where I'm putting my straps on, and I'm going to level it off, make my marks, drill it in. Once you have it in, there you go. You can use it for multiple things. You can use it for tape measures, inside, outside, black tape, whatever you decide. The next thing we're putting on here is a power strip. I noticed that the power strip on the back has a place for screws to go. So I found the screw head that matches this, making my markings on the bottom shelf. And all we're going to do is drill these screws in once you figure out how far away you want your strip. Wherever you decide to put it is where you're going to put it. So I'm making my markings here. I think they're about 2 inches away from the that strip of wood I put right there. Make sure that these are not flushed all the way in against the plywood, because you want enough give for that strip in order for that strip to fit into those holes. Once they fit in, push it in, and it locks right in. Now you have a strip for your table. I have no idea why this power strip here came with such an extensive power cord itself, but either way it did, so I made it work. Again, I'm using the straps here to put the power cord on. It's going to go all the way to the end, And once I have all these straps on, it should be a nice flushed a power cord on the back side of the frame. As you can see, here's the power plug for the wire strip. All I gotta do is plug an extension to that side and it should be ready to go. Okay, all I'm doing here now is I want this Cobalt multi-tool case right here to sit into the bottom shelf. This is where I found out that my tabletop is 99 inches long from base one corner to the other. All I'm doing is finding the middle portion. I want to set this Cobalt tool set in the middle of it. It has my screwdrivers, knives, scissors, socket sets, everything you could think of that goes in here that's used for mainly just home stuff, but it's going to work for this because a lot of those tools are used for projects I do. So all I'm doing is putting some 1-bys on here, some strips, putting some wood glue. I'm not going to screw these in. I'm just going to put some wood glue on there. That way there's no screw holes. And once you have all this leveled off and put in, it's going to look like a nice little bracket for that Cobalt. So when you open those shelves in and out, it's not going to go left, right, forward, or back. It's going to stay nice and flushed. Okay, now we're moving to the back side. Again, when I close the drawers on this set right here, I don't want it to go backwards either. So again, I'm just making a nice bracket for it. We're going to put the border around it, put some wood glue on there, and once you make your cuts, your measurements and your cuts, you're just going to place it in the back side of it. Once you have this one set into place, you're going to go ahead and make an additional bracket. Basically, it could be used for additional support or maybe just looks itself. I'm pretty sure the one that's holding behind the Cobalt already is going to be enough to hold it, but why not make it additional? I had the pieces of wood already. Let's go ahead and put it on. All I'm doing here is finding my middle mark so that I know where that strip's going to go. Whatever size you have, I can't really tell you what size to use because every tool set's different sizes. So just find your middle mark and you know exactly where that piece of strip has to go. So all I'm doing now here is putting my 36-inch ruler on, using some wood glue. A lot of my projects I do require some measurements and I don't want to have to keep taking out the tape measure. So if I want a piece of wood, I'm just going to lay it right on top of that, find exactly where I need to make my mark, and it's going to be a good tool for me to use. It won't be in the way if I need to lay something flat on top still. It's not thick enough to be in the way. Once you have that on, it should look something like this.
Alright, so thanks for watching the video. Like I said, there's many ways to make this thing. It's pretty solid. If I were to stand on it, sit on it, it's not going anywhere. Like I said, there's different ways to make these things. Eventually, you have so much room in this, you can actually put drawers in here if you want. You can stain this. You can, I mean, just make it however you want. Whatever projects that you usually do, make it to your liking and to what you normally do. I do a lot of woodwork, so I like to make sure that things I have around here, enough room for my tools, for drills and all that stuff. A ruler on top, I don't have to constantly be going for my tape measure. My power strip on the bottom so that I can plug things in. My vise to hold things in. I mean, we're talking whatever you decide to use your table for is what you're going to make it. So this is not exactly the best in the world, but it's to my liking and it's going to be useful for me. So thanks for watching the video, guys, and hopefully you guys can use this product somehow. Make it your own. Thanks.